Just hours after her daughter Madeleine went missing, Kate McCann reportedly made a frantic call to her mother, a call where she allegedly whispered 5 chilling words. "Gerry's done something terrible." Whether spoken or not, that single sentence acts as the first hairline crack in the official story, a fissure through which the emotional truth of this case begins to escape. It taps into a universal fear that the person we trust the most could become the architect of our deepest sorrow. My promise to you is that we won't get bogged down debating if that sentence is a journalistic fact. Instead, we'll use it as a lens, a way to examine the psychology of a couple at their breaking point and understand this tragedy not just through the timeline of events, but through the internal fractures they reveal. The deepest wounds are often the ones no one can see. The story we were all told was one of a couple, Kate and Gerry McCann, completely united in their grief, a solid front against an unseen monster. We saw the familiar archetypes play out on our screens, the respectable doctor parents, pillars of their community, devastated but resilient. We saw the innocent child, an angel seemingly plucked from her bed in a holiday paradise turned into a place of horror. The official narrative gave us a clear enemy to fear and a couple to rally behind. It was a nightmare, yes, but a simple one, where the roles of victim and villain felt clearly defined. The world embraced this image of a couple who, even when faced with the unthinkable, stood strong, side by side, spearheading a global search for their daughter. This picture of perfect unity, forged in the fires of tragedy, inspired a wave of donations, celebrity endorsements, and even political pressure. That's the story that captivated the globe. Speaking of the globe, I'm curious, what time is it where you are right now? Drop a comment below. It's always incredible to see our community of investigators connected from every corner of the planet, all searching for the truth. Now, let's return to the case, because this is where that polished public image begins to show cracks. What if that unity was a performance? What if, behind the facade of solidarity, there was a deep chasm of resentment, guilt, and unspoken fear? The central idea of this exploration isn't about a stranger abduction. It's about a fracture within the family itself. The hidden truth might be that the dynamic between Kate and Gerry McCann in those first critical hours and days reveals a psychological tension that the official story simply can't account for. That phrase, "Gerry's done something terrible," doesn't have to be an accusation of a malicious act. It could be the tormented echo of a catastrophic decision, a choice that may have led to Madeleine's tragic end and trapped Kate in a pact of silence that, for one fleeting moment, her soul could no longer endure. Our investigation will analyze their behavior, the words left unspoken, and the telling glances captured on camera. We'll explore the psychology of trauma and the crushing weight of conflicting loyalties. But to truly understand the fracture between this couple, we first need to look at the man who, according to that desperate whisper, did something terrible. The analysis starts with Gerry McCann's inexplicably controlled demeanor in front of the world's cameras. While Kate's pain appeared visceral and raw, Gerry's behavior in the first interviews presents a case study in emotional dissonance. Where one would expect to see a shattered father, we instead find a crisis manager. In one of his first public appearances, just days after Madeleine vanished, Gerry spoke about setting up a fund, the need for a media campaign, and the importance of harnessing the press. His words were strategic, calculated. He didn't sound like a parent lost in the fog of grief. He sounded like a CEO managing a public relations disaster. This emotional disconnect is the first piece of our puzzle. He seemed more focused on controlling the narrative than on expressing the agony of his loss. Contrast this with Kate's almost palpable despair, her voice barely a whisper. They claimed to be united in grief, but the visual evidence suggested two people experiencing the same tragedy in fundamentally opposite ways. Gerry's composure didn't read as the strength of a resilient father, but as the cold detachment of someone harboring a secret. The phrase, "Gerry's done something terrible," begins to echo here. Perhaps not as an accusation of an act, but as Kate's horror at seeing his reaction, at the chilling speed with which he shifted from father to strategist. This facade of control wasn't limited to his words. Observers and journalists on the scene noted an almost bizarre routine. Every morning, Gerry would go for a run or play tennis. He explained it as a way to keep a clear head, to stay strong for the search. But to a world watching, and perhaps to a wife who seemed to be disintegrating with every passing second, this semblance of normality felt profoundly abnormal. It was like watching a man desperately clinging to a routine, as if nothing had changed, while his entire world had collapsed. This powerful need for control, to maintain an appearance of normalcy at all costs, is a revealing psychological trait. Grieving people are consumed by pain. They rarely worry about appearances. People with something to conceal, however, often obsess over how they are perceived by others. If the couple's behavior raised red flags, the performance of their group of friends, the so-called Tapas 7, turns suspicion into a near certainty that something is deeply wrong. They weren't just friends on holiday. They became the co-authors of a carefully constructed narrative. Let's analyze the script they presented. It all starts with the central pillar of the abduction story, Jane Tanner's testimony. She claims she saw a man carrying a child in pink pajamas around 9:15 p.m., walking away from the McCanns' apartment. This became the abductor sighting, the supposed proof that an outsider took Madeleine. But this proof is a house of cards. First, Tanner's description of the man and the events changed multiple times. She claimed to have seen this from a distance of nearly 50 meters at night. The certainty with which she described the child's pajamas, while offering almost no detail about the man's face, is curious, to say the least. It was later discovered that another British tourist, Jez Wilkins, was carrying his own sleeping daughter from the kids' club along that same path at that exact time. He fit the general description. When faced with this possibility, Tanner's certainty faltered. The phantom sighting that propped up the abduction theory for years was most likely just an innocent father carrying his tired child to bed. The very foundation of the official story was a mirage. Then there's the contradiction of the dinner checks, the part of their script that defies simple logic. The official story is that the group had a surveillance system, with one of them checking on all the children every 30 minutes. It sounds responsible, but when you map out the alleged times, the alibi evaporates into a chaos of contradictions. Gerry McCann stated he checked on his children around 9:05 p.m., claiming he went inside the apartment, saw the children's bedroom door was ajar, and confirmed they were all asleep. Just 10 minutes later, at 9:15 p.m., Jane Tanner supposedly sees the abductor walking away. But another friend, Matthew Oldfield, claims he went to the McCanns' apartment in that exact same interval. His version is different. He says he offered to check on the McCann children while checking on his own. He claims he only opened the apartment door, did not enter, and assumed everything was fine because he heard nothing. Critically, he stated that the children's bedroom door was completely closed, directly contradicting Gerry's testimony from moments before. So, in a 10 to 15-minute window, we have Gerry saying the bedroom door was open and Matthew saying it was closed. We have Gerry saying he went inside and Matthew saying he just listened from the doorway. The versions simply don't align. The timing of the checks doesn't add up. For this timeline to be plausible, people would have been crossing paths on the short walk between the restaurant and the apartments, yet no one reported seeing each other at these crucial moments. It felt like a theater of surveillance, where each actor was performing in a different play with a different script. Their story just doesn't fit together. What strikes you as the more unsettling inconsistency so far? Gerry's controlled behavior or the tangled web of the dinner alibi? Leave your investigator's opinion in the comments below. The insights from this community often illuminate what others have missed. While human words created a fog of confusion, science soon arrived to offer brutal clarity. Under pressure, the Portuguese police brought in two silent but powerful investigators, Eddie and Keela. These English Springer Spaniels were considered the best in the world at their specialty. Eddie was a human remains detection dog, trained to detect the unique scent of the deceased, even in trace amounts and years later. Keela was a blood detection dog, trained to find traces of human blood, even after it had been cleaned. What these dogs found was devastating to the official narrative and gave a terrible new weight to Kate's alleged words. Inside apartment 5 amperes, the very place from which Madeleine was supposedly taken. Keela, the blood dog, gave a positive alert behind the living room sofa, in that exact same spot. Eddie, the human remains dog, also alerted. He gave a second, strong alert in the parents' bedroom, near the wardrobe. Think about the implications of this. In the common areas where the family lived and relaxed, the dogs detected the scents of both blood and human remains not in Madeleine's room, but in the living room and her parents' bedroom. But the discovery that shatters nearly any defense came later. The dogs were taken to the resort's parking garage. Eddie, the human remains dog, gave an unequivocal alert on the key to the Renault Scenic that the McCanns had rented 25 days after Madeleine's disappearance, the key that Kate McCann carried with her. Then, inside the trunk of that same car, both Eddie and Keela alerted positively. The scent of the deceased and human blood were present in a car the parents were using weeks after the supposed abduction. The defense team tried to discredit the dogs, suggesting they could have been reacting to harmless things like soiled diapers or meat from the supermarket. But these animals are not pets. They are precision biological sensors. They are specifically trained to ignore every other odor except for human blood or the specific chemical compounds released by a decomposing human body. They don't get confused. They are scientific instruments, and their findings were chilling. The science seemed to be sending an undeniable message. Evidence of Madeleine's passing was present in that room, and in that car, a truth that is difficult to dismiss. So, if the abduction story begins to crumble under scrutiny, and if Kate's reported words hint at a terrible secret, what might have truly unfolded that night? To explore that, we must do what the official investigation was hesitant to do. Set aside the official narrative, the phantom abductor, the open window, and attempt to reconstruct the events of May 3, 2007, through the lens of psychology, logic, and the very evidence that was so contested. Forget what was said. Let's focus on what the evidence suggests. A possible reconstruction of that night could begin here. The children, including Madeleine, are given something to help them sleep soundly, a measure to ensure a peaceful dinner for the parents and their friends. It's a risky practice, but perhaps not unthinkable for two doctors who feel they are in control, especially given Kate McCann's own diary entries about the difficulty in getting the children to sleep. The decision is made, perhaps by Gerry, the more pragmatic of the two. He administers the sedative. This, in itself, is an act of profound negligence, but in this scenario, something goes terribly wrong. An accidental overdose, a tragic reaction. Madeleine doesn't wake up. During one of the checks, perhaps the first and only real check of the night, made by Kate, she finds her daughter unresponsive. The panic that follows is not born of an abduction, but of crushing guilt and the specter of professional ruin. This is the moment the fracture between the couple may have occurred. Kate, overwhelmed by shock and grief, might want to call for help. But Gerry, the strategist, the man who manages crises, might see a different, devastating outcome. The end of their careers, their reputation, their freedom. Two doctors, a child who has passed away under their care from an accidental administration of sedatives. This is where Kate's reported words to her mother could find their deepest, most tragic meaning. Gerry's done something terrible. The terrible act, in this theory, wasn't a malicious one. It was the decision made in that moment of pure panic, not to call for help, not to seek medical assistance, but to begin concealing the truth. He convinces her there is no other way. The instinct for self-preservation, led by him, takes over. In a few desperate seconds, the decision is made. The tragedy must be hidden. Madeleine's remains are quickly and quietly moved, perhaps concealed in the parents' wardrobe, the exact spot where the detection dog, Eddie, would later signal a significant finding. It is at this moment that the performance begins. Kate McCann returns to the restaurant, not in genuine panic, but playing the role of a mother who is not yet aware, a silent partner trapped in a script she did not write. The pretense of the regular checks is reinforced among the group, a pact of silence sealed, not necessarily to hide a crime, but to hide collective negligence, as they had all left their children unattended. Finally, at a calculated moment, Kate returns to the apartment to discover the disappearance. The scream the world heard was not one of surprise, but the opening act of a heartbreaking performance. The window is opened from the inside, the scene is staged, and the story of an abduction is launched. Madeleine's remains stay hidden, awaiting an opportunity to be moved to a final location, using the car that would be rented weeks later, the same car where the scent of the deceased would be detected. Why stage something so elaborate? Why not call for help and claim a tragic accident? The answer may lie in the psychology behind the facade. It's easier to pretend you had no choice, to blame fate or a monster, anything other than the direct consequence of your own actions. Gerry may have chosen this path of self-deception, but Kate's reported call suggests that, for a fleeting moment, she could no longer deceive herself. The human mind, under the pressure of panic and shame, is capable of compartmentalizing grief and focusing obsessively on survival. The image of the perfect, victimized parents became a suit of armor. Every interview, every tearful appeal, was not just a search for a lost daughter, but a constant reinforcement of their story, a performance for a global jury. So far, does this reconstruction of events seem more plausible to you than the story of a phantom kidnapper? Does the psychology of fear and self-preservation better explain their actions than the pain of grief? Let me know in the comments if the pieces are starting to fit for you, because the evidence I'm about to present is not just a theory. The definitive proof, the smoking gun in this case, is not a confession but something the McCann's defense fought fiercely to discredit, and for good reason: the analysis of the DNA found in the trunk of the Renault Scenic. The British Forensic Science Service, using an advanced technique called low copy number, LCN, analyzed the samples collected where the specialized canines had alerted. The result was an atomic bomb for the investigation. The lab found a partial DNA profile composed of 15 of Madeleine's 19 genetic markers. The probability of this DNA belonging to anyone other than her was astronomically low. But the most devastating part wasn't just finding Madeleine's DNA in the car. It was that the sample was identified as coming from bodily fluids consistent with the process of decomposition. The defense argued that the sample was complex, that the LCN technique was controversial, that the DNA could have come from Madeleine's clothes or toys. But this explanation doesn't hold up. The DNA found was not simple touch DNA like what you'd find on a piece of clothing. And the dogs, who are not influenced by lawyers or the media, do not alert to the smell of toys. They alert to the unmistakable scent of the deceased. Put the pieces together. The specialized canines alert in the apartment. The canines for human remains and biological evidence alert in the trunk of a car rented 25 days after the disappearance. And in that exact spot, science finds DNA from Madeleine. The only logical conclusion is that Madeleine McCann's remains were in that trunk. And if her remains were in that car, the abduction story is not just a fabrication, it's a profound concealment of what truly happened. With the physical evidence on the table, the question shifts from what happened to Madeleine to who might have helped obscure the truth. The answer, according to some, involves a level of influence far beyond just a panicked couple, pointing toward the power of an entire state. Truth, by itself, has no power. It needs a system willing to acknowledge it. In the McCann case, when the truth carried by science and logic knocked on the system's door, the door wasn't just closed, it was locked, and the key was thrown away. The effort to hide what happened to Madeleine wasn't just that of a panicked couple. It was an institutional effort driven by diplomacy, money, and public image. When the DNA results and the canine alerts pointed to the McCanns as the only logical persons of interest, the consequence was not a deepening of the investigation, but unprecedented pressure from the British government on the Portuguese authorities. The image of the United Kingdom and its citizens was at stake. It was easier to sell the story of a foreign monster than to accept one of fatal negligence by British doctors on holiday. In the face of mounting evidence, the response was a massive media campaign, funded by donations and orchestrated by public relations experts, which turned persons of interest into victims and investigators into villains. The narrative shifted. The spotlight moved away from the contradictions and the forensic findings and turned instead toward a relentless, global search for a phantom kidnapper, a search that consumed millions and diverted all attention from the epicenter of the truth. Apartment 5 amperes. The media, rather than interrogating the story, often became a powerful amplifier for the official version, and anyone who dared to disagree was publicly vilified. The price of truth in this case was paid by those who refused to participate in the performance. The face of this injustice is Gonçalo Amaral, the chief inspector of the Portuguese Judiciary Police who led the initial investigation. He was the first to see through the charade. He connected the dots, followed the evidence from the dogs and the DNA, and bravely declared the parents arguidos, or formal suspects. His reward for this integrity, his professional destruction. Pressured by the British government and his own superiors, Amaral was removed from the case. After retiring, he wrote the book Maddie, The Truth of the Lie, detailing the theory of an accident and a cover-up. This silenced him, dragging him through years of legal battles to defend not only his book, but his right to state his investigation's conclusions. A man's career was sacrificed on the altar of diplomatic convenience. He became the most visible casualty of a system that preferred a comfortable lie over an inconvenient truth. His story is a grim reminder that sometimes fighting for the truth means fighting giants alone. It's infuriating, it's frustrating, and it is the very reason this channel exists. If you believe these stories of obscured truths need a voice, that the facts shouldn't be buried by power and influence, then join this mission. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Every subscription is a vote of confidence and a sign that we are not alone in this search. In the end, the moral verdict is clear, even if the legal one is a blank page. Despite the scientific evidence, the testimonial contradictions, and the relentless logic pointing to a tragic accident followed by a desperate cover-up, official justice was never served. The Madeleine McCann case remains to the world a mystery. But it is not a mystery for a lack of clues. It is a mystery for a lack of will. The abduction narrative, though illogical, was simply more acceptable, more profitable, and politically safer than the truth. The system won. Justice was buried. But in the midst of all this darkness, one final question remains, the most personal of all. What does this terrible story teach us about our own world, and what do we do with this inconvenient truth? The lesson is brutally simple. Justice is not always blind. It has eyes, and it often chooses to look away when the truth is too ugly, too expensive, or politically incorrect. What do we do with that? We refuse to forget. My conviction, after analyzing the psychological fracture behind the facts, is that the phrase, "Gerry's done something terrible," is the key to everything. The terrible act was not one decision but a cascade of them, starting with negligence and culminating in the choice to sacrifice his daughter's truth to save himself. What haunts me is the image of Kate McCann, trapped between loyalty to her husband and the unbearable grief for her daughter, forced to live a lie that, for one brief moment, she could no longer carry. The real tragedy, for me, is the silence that followed that cry of despair. And now, after we've gone through all of this together, I need to know what this story has awakened in you. Use the comments below not just to debate, but to bear witness. Bear witness to your outrage. Leave a word, a sentence that shows we have not forgotten and we do not accept the silence. I will read every comment, because, in a world that wants us quiet, our collective voice is the only weapon we have. And this fight against silence doesn't end here. The same dynamics of power and secrets we saw in Portugal are repeated in an infamous case in the United States. In our next documentary, we will investigate how the wealth and influence of the Ramsey family may have buried the truth along with their 6-year-old daughter, JonBenet. To continue on this mission with me, subscribe and turn on notifications. The search for truth cannot stop. Until next time, remember, the truth doesn't need you to believe in it. It only needs you not to forget it.